Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Chelsea Green Publishing's In Conversation series. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Ann Armbrecht, author of the newly released book, The Business of Botanicals, and legendary herbalist Rosemary Gladstar. Ann is the director of the Sustainable Herbs Program. She is also a writer and anthropologist whose work explores the relationships between humans and the earth, most recently through her work with plants and plant medicine. Rosemary has been practicing, living, learning, teaching, and writing about herbs for over 45 years. She is the author of 12 books and author and director of the popular home study course, The Science and Art of Herbalism. Before I turn the conversation over to these two wonderful women, a few housekeeping items. The conversation portion of this event will last about 30 to 45 minutes, and it will have a question and answer period at the end. Please feel free to drop any questions you may have in the Q&A box. That will be the easiest place for me to see them during the question and answer period, which I'm going to moderate. And because this is a celebration of the launch of Ann's new book, this is going to be a shameless plug for you to buy it at the retailer of your choice. We love to support our local booksellers, and if you do too, the local one for us is Bear Pond Books out of Montpelier. But if you're not, it's also available on the Chelsea Green website, Ann's website, bookshop.org, IndieBound, and Amazon. Thank you for tuning in, and I will turn it over to Ann and Rosemary.
Great. Thank you, Jenna.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll start, Ann, if you don't mind, because I'd love to just take a moment to honor this book, which I think is a very brave and courageous book. I'm a great lover of literature. I love reading. I really love good writing. And of course, I'm a great lover of herbs. And to find a book that combines both, that's both an amazing read. It's like an adventure story. It introduces you to amazing characters, but it has this heart and core of a really important topic. So I just found it amazing, and I'm really honored to be here to, really honor Ann and to support her for this book that she, I think, really had the courage to write. So thank you so much, Ann. I'm honored to be here with you this evening.
Thank you so much, Rosemary and Jenna. Thank you. And if you hear a sound, it's our cat in the background. Sorry. And thank everyone who's here. It's I see your numbers. I don't see your faces, but thank you so much for being here. And I actually wanted to start with a few thanks. First, Rosemary, to you. I don't know if you remember, but we were sitting on the stairs in the kitchen at Sage Mountain, and the advanced course was ending, and I was talking about herbs and what next. And you offered me a small, it was quite small, grant to do some research on the history of UPS, United Plant Savers. Oh. And that was kind of all I needed for you to open the door and believe in me enough to open that door. And then I could step through, and that led to the next step. And the next step was when Tirona Lodog, who I also want to acknowledge, was in a course talking about where herbs come from. And nobody really talked about that before. And so that sparked my curiosity. And then in another class that Stephen Foster gave at the Green Nations in the early 2000s, he gave a class on sustainable herbalism. And he talked about the impact of déchets on overharvesting of plants. And that also, it was not many people went to that class, but it caught my attention. And I now have the great honor of working with Stephen in my work at American Botanical Council. And I want to acknowledge Joseph Brinkman, who opened another big door. Yeah. And for those who don't know, Joseph Brinkman has kind of defined responsible sourcing in the botanical industry. And his trust in me and my project really allowed companies to trust me. And then I want to thank Mark Blumenthal at American Botanical Council, who by having the Sustainable Herbs Program come into that organization, a national nonprofit working to really bring critical scientific rigor to the study of herbal medicine, his bringing this project into their organization helped me reach a much bigger audience, the companies that really need to change. And I want to thank Fern Bradley, my editor at Chelsea Green, who redefined what editing means to me. She brought this ability to see the detail and the big picture that I didn't think editors did anymore. And so I could keep going and going, but I wanted to mention and thank all of these people. And it's not surprising to thank people who help you with a book. But I want to mention it here because we don't often think about it with products. So here, like I have a tincture, we look at the tincture. We don't think about the web of people behind that have gone into making this product, a good or bad product. And since that's really the theme that I'm talking about in Business of Botanicals, that's sort of why I wanted to bring in the bigger community first. So yeah, that was my.
That's beautiful, Anne. Thank you. Yeah, I think that speaks to the depth of you and also just the gratitude. Yeah, we are part of a really incredible community. And I think this, I know that the title of this book is The Business of Herbs, but to me, I think the subtitle, Exploring the Healing Promise of Herbs, is actually a much better title for it, because it's not just about the herbal business. It's really about herbal medicine, and it's about history, and it's about the people who are gathering the medicine. And ultimately, yes, it is about, it's provocative. It's asking us to think about what we're taking into our body in the form of herbs, much like the natural food industry has asked us to think about the food and the growers and the condition of the earth. Yeah, so that's beautiful. So you kind of answered this, but already in your introduction, but I'd like to start just by inspiration. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, for a long time, Wendell Berry once, and I've talked about this quotation a lot, but he talks about how when we drink water, we can't imagine the water being drained from the lake. When we have a piece of a table, we don't imagine the forest being cut down. And that disconnection allows us to forget our moral and ecological responsibility for those impacts. And so, I heard him say that in 1996, and it stayed with me. And then I was teaching a class at Dartmouth College, like 1999, before following commodities became a thing to do. And I had my students follow one object to the source. And when they shared what they found, we were all speechless. We all just sort of sat there, and it was fine. The cancers in the water, and the deforestation, all of the things that we know quite well. But to have it all laid on the table in the room, I didn't know what to do with it, and everybody just left. I didn't really then create a container for us to hold that. Okay, what do we do with the impact of our choices? So I've had those questions in my mind, and then as I came to herbal medicine, and I was coming back from rural Nepal, and felt like I found this home in herbal medicine, really with the way you teach about it, talk about this relationship with the earth as something alive with which we can have a relationship, and a sense of not just extracting resources for our own use, but really a give and take. So that I kind of swallowed whole. But then I learned more about the industry of herbs, and herbalists talk about the intention that they bring to making medicine and growing plants. But then quite often they recommend products that were sourced from a global supply chain. And nobody, except for that comment by Tirone and the workshop by Stephen Foster, nobody in my world was really talking about what to me felt like a disconnect. My inspiration was to ask that question: can we find intention in a global supply chain?
Wow. I know when you first brought up this idea, you were sharing it with me early on when it was still an idea. And I'm just thinking, oh, nobody's going to want to know that, Anne. This is why I use that word brave, because actually not just in this book, but in the other book that you wrote also, and even in the film that you and your husband Terry did, Newman, you broach subjects that are not light. They're not things that people normally want to look at. And that's one of the things I love and admire about you so much. And what I love about this book is you take a big subject, a hard subject really, and the herbal industry doesn't really want to support you in this work, and the herbalists don't even though we all know it's important. And you approach it very humanistically, so you make it a story that's so worthwhile and touches us in a very personal way so that we say yes to the whole idea of it. I thought that was amazing, actually. And I was laughing because somewhere in your book, I read this statement that you made about how you were interested, in changing the world in a big way, not just in a small way. I think I always do it differently, right? To me, it's always, changing one person at a time. Like if I can teach one person how to make a medicine and how to look for good quality, I've done good work. But you want to change the world and you go out to do it. So I know that this journey took you to many parts of the world. And I'm just wondering, what were some of the challenges? What were some of the biggest challenges on any level that you want to talk about that you encountered?
There are so many.
Partly just packing your family around with you, right?
Well, thank you for those kind words about the book. And first, this was kind of a challenge, but was figuring out how, it's an industry with a lot of secrecy. And so to be allowed to visit producer groups or companies, I had to be trustworthy. And I was never interested in writing in this investigative journalistic tell-all story about the botanical industry. Because there's a lot of bad things that you could write about. I never wanted to do that, but I also didn't want to be naive and say, oh, it's great when things weren't great. And so that was a challenge all along the way, how to navigate that line. And with the companies that I visited, I would share what I wrote and the videos we've made for the Sustainable Herbs Program. I would share those with companies because again, I wasn't here to share more than people really wanted shared. So that was one, was gaining and maintaining that trust. Another was, so it's one thing to follow coffee or cocoa, which is one product through a one supply chain, but botanical companies source, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 botanicals from all over the world. Some will be roots or leaves or flowers, and all of those require different times of harvest, different ways to dry. And I would ask Joseph Brinkman, I've asked him a million questions, and I would ask him one little question, and his answers would be so long because it would all be different, depending on the circumstances. So kind of, but that doesn't become a really interesting story to tell. That there's so many details, and so another challenge was figuring out at what level to tell the story.
I have to interrupt 1 second because you did do that beautifully, exactly what you're just saying in that example of asking Joseph about numbers, and you run through it in that one incident, but it's only like one paragraph that you're able to explain how many details are involved in that answer. And that's all you had to do. We got it. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something about this, because Fern kept asking me for numbers and things. And I was like, I don't know, I can't say. It depends. And so finally I shared that message from Joseph to give her some sense of why I was having such
I picked it up. I saw it there. It was fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, and another thing I think was, I haven't grown up in a manufacturing family or a farming family, but the farming was one thing, but seeing manufacturing on this scale is quite surprising. And I had to learn how to see and understand what were the surprising things that made a difference, and not just be naive because of my distance. Like Sebastian Pohl, who co-founded Pukka Herbs, a UK company, he said, that the herb community can be quite critical of the industrialization, but that can be because we're so divorced from it, or all of us critical of the food production. So figuring out when I'm walking through a producer, facility, what were the things that should be a red flag and what were not things to worry so much about.
It's very cool. Yeah. So that kind of leads me to my next question. So what were the really surprising things? You kind of mentioned that too, but like just things that really surprised you on this journey that you took, both good and bad, things that just popped up for you that were really unexpected.
Well, when you asked that, and I thought, when I was thinking more about that question, I think the biggest thing that surprised me was what you said at the beginning, is that I thought I was writing a book about the botanical industry, but ultimately that's not what I was writing. And it was took many drafts and back and forth with Chelsea Green till I kind of got it in a place where they could put it into the production line, in part because I couldn't figure out what I was writing about. And so I think it was about this connection, this question that I said at the beginning, if it's possible to find connection in an economic system that in many ways is the source of our disconnection. And so then that helped shape the stories that I chose to include, because there's so much material that I didn't include, and a lot of that were some of the surprising, really bad practices that weren't interesting to talk about. They're just people being careless. And so I chose to focus on the people who were not being careless, the people who are really taking care of the people, taking care of the plants, taking care of the biodiversity, taking care of the machines. So
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. I remember that was something I read in this book. Well, it's really filled with stories of really interesting plant lovers, from all over the world, on all different levels, like families that have been doing it for generations, or even people in the manufacturing industry that were really involved in just manufacturing, but you found that they really did have a love for the plant. It's filled with these rich stories of people that we would never meet or know. But I remember that was one line that you talked about, how you expected that it would be the plants that you would be the powerful memories for you, and in fact it was the people. Would you mind sharing maybe just one or two stories of particular individuals that really popped out at you that you remember?
there's a woman, Anna, who is the international sales person for the company in Eastern Poland, who was one of the few people who spoke English there. And so that's why she was my contact. And we exchanged like 2 messages over email, and then she drove an hour to meet me at the train, and she gave me a big hug and took
Oh,
such care. She sort of felt such immediate affection for me, and so me in turn for her. She invited me to her house, and her mother she collects for Runo, her mother, and loves the wild plants. And so we went out into the field, the meadow out, it's just kind of some little suburban stretch in a village in Poland. So for her, it was a love of plants. She loved the plants, and her work didn't really involve a lot of, her work involved buying and selling herbs for this company. So I think what struck me was how immediately close some of these connections could be.
yeah, I have to say, I find with people who really have their feet on the ground and their hands in the dirt, it's one of the things I love so much about being an herbalist, is this connection that's universal, really. And then also that readiness to share. I call it cultural appreciation. It seems like herbalists everywhere. I mean, I'm not talking now about the industry. I'm really talking about herbalists and herbalism. Just how willing they are to share recipes and remedies and ways that they harvest herbs. There's not so much secrecy in that community as there might be, and as you were mentioning, that in the more global manufacturing industry, for certain. Yeah. One thing I also wanted to mention, Anne, when you said that, the thing that was surprising to you as this book began to unfold, as it kind of went in a different direction. And I always feel that plants are working through us, once we open ourselves up to them. So, we think we're going in this direction, they keep guiding us back. And did you find that a lot when you were doing this work, both with yourself and other people?
And I especially found that in India, so we were in India for 6 months, and which was quite difficult to find. I had an idea of the companies that we would go to, but it kept being difficult because of transportation or contacts or things like that. And so I kept being led into different places that would suddenly, in Kodaikanal, we were in someone's house where we happened to be staying, and it turned out, I just randomly met him on the side of the street, and it turned out he worked for an international NGO really representing the indigenous communities and wild plants. And I thought, oh, that's why I came here. And then, so in India, especially, there were a series of kind of arbitrary places I ended up, and I tell one in the book also, somebody finally said, oh yes, I'm growing these medicinal plants, come visit. And so I took a bus down, like 3-hour bus down, and he showed me this kind of depressing little dry field with not many medicinal plants there. And later it turned out that this person was perhaps embezzling some money from some national NGO. And I thought, oh, I wasted that time. Why did I do that? But then I thought, so many people that I would ask who are in charge of sourcing botanicals, I would say, how do you know who to trust? And they say, you always make mistakes, that making mistakes is part of the business.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I thought, okay, that really helped give me a perspective on, for this man, like what's at stake in a country like India, where if you fall, it's hard, it's really scary. And so I think the more I could hand myself over to say, okay, what am I, like listening to the plants, right? Like, what is this experience helping me see that I couldn't see before?
Yeah.
Which, as an anthropologist, was really challenging, because I was like, oh, my research is not very rigorous.
Well, yeah, the nature of plants, right? I think really, yeah. I just have to ask you to tell the story that you mentioned in here about Neoma Sadler. I mean, I know her story, but I just think it's so inspiring. And it's one of the many. And, I just want to share this also, that, you're weaving in so much into the story, and yet it does really address the global business, the global herbal industry, so you're bringing all this very personal relationship and in really intimacy with people and their relationship with plants into the story, but it's definitely addressing these really big issues of, what are we going to do about the global industry? So it's remarkable to me how you did that. And I have to say thank you, thank you, thank you. But yeah, would you share Neoma's story? Because I felt that was very, very inspiring. And it's,
Yeah, well, thank you. So in India, I had the chance to visit the traditional medicinals foundations projects in Rajasthan, and Neoma and Drake were there at the time, which was great.
oh,
And so I had the opportunity not only to see their projects, but to see them in action. And so I did my research in Nepal and this international conservation area, and I was quite disillusioned with any kind of international development. It felt like Westerners coming in and leaving a lot of money inappropriately, and like buildings that were run down, and nothing really worked. And so I didn't have high expectations going in to visit this project. And what they have done, and there's more information in the book or on their website, but they've been working to, Neoma, when she was there, realized that these farmers were growing senna, but they were really water, it's a water scarce area. And so they had to walk a long way for the water. And so she realized that in order to address, if farmers are growing senna, but they're spending all their day, the women are all day carrying water, that's not going to be very good quality senna. And so you have to look at the whole social economic ecosystem. And if people are well cared for, they'll create a better product, so it's better for the whole industry. So we spent about 3 or 4 days visiting people in the villages where they worked. And what struck me so much was the way Neoma was so present with whomever she interacted with. Yeah. And she remembered their names, she looked them in their eyes. The younger children adored her. They just looked up at her, and she knew how to respond to them and also use her charisma to inspire them to stay in school or to do whatever she want. I just saw the power of presence, really, and her attention. And when I was speaking with the translator when I was leaving, and I was asking her about the difference, and she said, people know how much Neoma cares. And
oh yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, Ann. I do want to say I wasn't asking that because of TM or my relationship with them. It was mostly because I'm so inspired by her work with women, and just how in growing those herbs they make such an enormous difference for those villages. Anybody who's doing that kind of work. Yeah, I think maybe that might lead into my next question. So I know that there was a lot of hard things that you learned, but also there was some really uplifting and empowering things. So are there ways that you see that the global herbal industry is bringing positive change and doing really good things? And if you don't mind just sharing maybe a couple of examples of that.
Yeah, and that story flows into that, because what I found was the most inspiring was where people brought that quality of attention to their work. And, it was most pronounced there with Neoma work, meeting with these women. But in so many places where, when we were traveling in southern India with Sebastian Pohl and Ben Heron from Pukka Herbs, just seeing the farmers that they're working with, small, a couple hectares growing Fair for Life Tulsi. And you see the difference it is making in those communities, and then in another place they were growing field mint, and the amount of added value that these farmers could get by selling to a company that was also really invested in things like making sure the buffer zones were intact, that there weren't fertilizers and pesticides being applied. So they were giving a way to have a livelihood in these rural communities that was kind of healthy, if you think in those concentric circles, right? That it's not just this end product, but this end product is only as healthy as all of the steps along the way. And there are definitely companies that are doing that. And also the ones that are inspiring are the ones that aren't saying they have all the answers, because nobody has all the answers. And it's a journey, and it's a process of learning how to better take care. But yeah, and just even recently with these webinars that I've been facilitating with the American Botanical Council, with a producer group, a woman from Croatia who was talking about why growing organic is so important to them, and because it's their community, and there's no way they would want to be polluting, adding chemicals to their community. And so that, I think, closing the circle, what's inspiring is when companies, it doesn't have to be that you source it all from your local area, but that there are connections made between the different segments of the supply.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah, total sense. Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask is, and you address it in the book, of course, is just that sustainability question and the amount or lack of amount of attention paid to the actual condition of the plants in the wild. So that's a huge concern for many of us here who are herb users and herb lovers, I should say. Is we're thrilled to see the world waking up to herbalism again, but really concerned about over loving the plants, loving them to death. And we've addressed that, at least addressing it's a conversation here in the United States. I know we're far from solving the problem, but it's part of the conversation now. It's also a discussion, it's part of the conversation of many of the mid-sized and smaller herb companies, for certain, of sustainability. But what did you find in your world travels? Is that a concern? Is that coming up? Is that part of the discussion? Or
I was visiting, Fair Wild certified. A lot of the companies I was visiting were Fair Wild certified, and Fair Wild is kind of the international version of. It's different than what United Plant Savers is doing, but it's it's a sort of voluntary certification with really rigorous resource assessment, but it's a very small portion of the global industry.
how do we change that?
And so that's and I also want to add, so it's wild plants, but it's also, I feel like, cultivated plants, because it's how the plants are grown really matters. And that's, organic is a really small percentage of the global botanical industry, which is kind of shocking that pesticides and fertilizers are being used in these products that are for our health. And so even if, there's testing and all of that to make sure there's not pesticide residue at the end, that's all checked. But what about the farmers growing those plants? And what about pesticide drift from those plants onto wild plants? And so wild collectors, say from Bulgaria, their herbs can't be sold as organic, not because of anything they've done, but because of pesticide drift. And so those are huge questions. And they're, and everybody that I spoke with and people working on these issues in the industry are always asking, what's the driver? Is it companies or is it consumers? And often it comes down to price. These things cost more. In a couple of weeks, we're having a webinar, American Botanical Council webinar with farmers, organic farmers, one in Wisconsin, Trout Lake, and then Avoca in Italy, and they're all certified organic. And they all talk about pricing. There's a difference in the price for certified fair wild or organic. And so to me, I think if we all bought a little less and spend a little more on what we buy, that's a good thing, I think. Asking companies, everybody I spoke to also says it makes a big difference hearing. What do you think? I'm curious what you think about how to.
I was just going to say, that's one thing people have forgotten about is they can actually have dynamic conversations with everybody they buy from. And if you can't, don't buy from that company. If you can't call them up and have somebody intelligent on the other end of the line to ask your questions, don't buy from them. It's a simple thing as a phone call. If you're getting somebody a recording or a machine or somebody who says, I don't know, then you want to have these dynamic conversations with the people you're buying your herbs from, for God's sakes. First of all, it's fun. It takes just a few minutes. It's not like a big deal, but you should be able to have those conversations, which is one of the reasons it makes it fun to buy from smaller companies. I think there are really good big companies, by the way, who are supplying fabulous products. But again, even when you call those companies, there should be somebody that you can reach, that you can have a human heart-to-heart conversation with. And the other thing is, I just think, you need to ask those questions. It's not like, are you selling good quality products? It's like, are you growing your plants? Do you have farms? Are you supporting your farmers? What are you paying them actually to work in your fields? Just really basic questions. And I think that is important, and those old things, it's the same as food. It's the same as a food change. You want to buy locally as much as you can. You can't always buy locally, and so you kind of stretch out, but as much as you can, if you can go to your farmer's market, you pay a little more for your lettuce, but darn, it's real lettuce. It's got some little insect bites taken out of it even, it tastes good. And that's exactly, I think it's the same thing. And I know it is a huge issue, and we say, well, how do we make change in this? And I'm sure there were so many times when you were writing this book that you wondered, what is this going to make a difference? This is going to start an enormous conversation, this book. It's huge. It's a huge book. I think every herbalist should read this. First of all, it's a great book to read just for reading. But I just want to say it's no different than the organic food movement, really, of, 40 years ago, you couldn't find an organic anything, forget it. And it is true that the organic standards changed. It was very disappointing when that happened. But still, nonetheless, people can go into their grocery stores, not a health food store, or a whole food store. They can go into a grocery store and they can look for organic banana. And yes, it's true, when you follow the chain, it's not ideal, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. That's all we can do, is just take these tiny steps in the right direction. So this is the right direction. We're headed in the right direction. That's for sure. Thank you, Ann. Yeah, I think that's, I think that the most important thing is that as we use herbs and we begin to enter into the world of plants, even if it's simply a product that you buy at Walmart, you start there, you're starting somewhere, right? It may not be where we want to end up, but it's a start. It's letting you know that echinacea, it's not going to kill me. It's a plant. And it starts a discussion in your head. And that discussion is going to take you step by step. You may only get a few steps, but your children and then your grandchildren are going to be asking, Our job is just to make sure that these plants are here for future generations. That's it. And to start these discussions. That's what I feel.
Well, and I love what, Joseph, and I've written about this on the Sustainable Herbs Program blog, but he said he's asked by a lot of people in herb companies, what should I do? And he recommends that they pick a plant and follow it to the source and really understand what the conditions are. And two parts, the questions are all really good, but I love, he said, if your company is making a profit on that plant, then it's your responsibility to know this, everybody, not just the marketing people or the sourcing people, everybody to know that information. And then the other thing he says at the end, it's not easy, but if you're curious, you're not worried about easy.
I love Joseph. I don't know if he told you, but I met Joseph, God, it has to be 40 years ago. I used to come into my little tiny herb shop in Santa Rosa, and he would buy herbs in Guerneville, when I had my little shop in Guerneville. And he was probably 20 years old or something, 21, I think a couple years younger than I was. Yeah, it's so incredible. I mean, it was very obvious how brilliant he was, but it's very incredible to see what a voice he's become, and the power of the books that he's written and the work that he does, and has just kept that integrity and his curiosity all that time. It's really lovely to see. Yeah, it's great.
Well, and it makes me think back to, I think what plants offer, and what I think probably every student who's listening now of yours would say is what a gift that you have is that you open us to the plant, the power of what plants offer on our own unique journey. And so that's, to me, what the promise of herbal medicine is. Yes, it might make us feel, if you take bitters, it'll help do this or that, but it's also, they're inviting us on this journey that is leading us on whatever path it is for us to do the work that we're here to do in the world. Right now the world needs us all to kind of step up and really get to work. And so to me, plants, for those of us who are called to plants, they invite us on a journey that, this journey that this took me on was so much more, it led me in places I never would have expected. It challenged me, it gave me skills and confidence, and brought me into circles I never could have thought at the beginning. And it's made me a much fuller person, more rooted in the work I'm here to do. And that's the gift of plants, or that's the healing they offer. It's not unique to me. It's just to any of us who listen and listen and listen, I think.
Well, we always have to take a moment to just honor them as our teachers and our elders. They were here so many millions of years before we ever arrived, so I always like to point out that we have evolved in relationship to our plants, and that's why, and they're universal, they're worldwide. It's like speaking and eating and breathing air. They're part of what make us human, and they unite us around the world, and this universal sharing of plant energy and plant medicine and plant wisdom has been shared by people forever, from the beginning of time. It's like remarkable. And the plants themselves, when you look at how they love to travel, all their mechanisms of moving themselves around in the world, and then how they plant themselves in us, just however they find their way into us to get our attention. And then whammo, yeah, you're right, they change our lives. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, and they're doing that, right now. That's why I'm saying, like it's easy to get frustrated when you see all those products in the, in the drugstores. I think it's so amazing they're called drugstores, right? But I just feel like it's just another way that the plants are beckoning. They camouflage themselves in so many ways to get people's attention. And so that's just one more way. And even those people that were working in those manufacturing industries that you talked about, where you had to go through a locked door and have a password, and then, put your little net on and your white coat. And, those people, even though they're working with this, what seems almost innate and weird and so divorced from the plants, energy is powerful. It doesn't have to be in the form we know it. So in some way or another, those people are going to be impregnated with that energy. It's going to come through. Just energy does. It just seeps through the walls, and yeah, so they're going to get it. The plants are invading us again. they're on the march, you know, like the Ents in the trilogy, right? They're like they're on the march. They're marching back into us, helping us right ourselves on this planet. And really, we're a mass today. You know, we are growing massively. So yeah, and it's exciting to me, like just in the same way that you're talking about this billion-dollar industry, which, you know, is so big now, I can hardly follow it, the numbers. So is the homegrown folk herbalism as well. You know, so are those little tiny companies going out and growing their plants. You know, you can find those medicines today where 30 or 40 or 20 years ago it was hard to, but those little companies are also, you know, out there everywhere, begging for people to buy from them.
Well, and there was just that awesome and Blossom Herbal Conference too, organized by Zoe Gardner and Summer Singletree,
Oh yeah.
to really provide the regulatory and that kind of support for small and emerging herb companies, which I found so inspiring, because I think one thing that was quite discouraging was, say, when I only went to Supply Side West, which is this big ingredient supplier meeting in Las Vegas, and I saw the scale and how, you know, the whole world of ingredient suppliers and contract manufacturers, and how difficult it is for smaller companies really to get beyond the farmer's market. And so this conference just last week really inspired me, because I thought, oh, if they can help more companies kind of break through a little bit, that would be awesome.
That's so good. I'm so glad you attended that. You know, I saw it. It looked really wonderful.
Yeah.
But since I sort of stepped out of the herb, I was like, oh, yeah. But I was really excited to see that being offered. It looked wonderful. Yeah, it's like a really great. So did they have good attendance?
They had great attendance. It
Great.
was
Well,
a
so
lot of
right.
women, 1 or 2 men. But yeah, a lot.
Yeah, so that's good. That's one thing that's one thing I think that the pandemic is offering. You know, one of its gifts actually is the opportunity for a lot of these small businesses to step out, you know, through the internet and through Zoom and Etsy and stuff, you know. So, and people right now are really, really turning towards the plants and natural medicine. It's very encouraging to see. Not in the, you know, I don't see it in the big industry. You don't see the government saying to people, there's ways you can build and support your immune system and keep your, you know, system strong in the world right now. There's not a lot of that, but there's certainly the information available if people are looking for it.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to add one, when you're talking about plants and the energy of plants, one thing that really interested me in looking at plants also is because, unlike other commodities, they're alive. All those qualities you were saying, they have this energy, and yet they're also traded as commodities. And so that the fact that they're both, I wonder, do they offer us maybe like a path to thinking about how to be in a market economy in a way that takes better care. And you know, right now there's another fabulous series, Reconciling Ways of Knowing, which is really talking with a lot of Indigenous speakers in the US around their relationship to the land and spirit, and talking about the moral economy, the moral kind of ethical relationship with plants. And I think on a cultural level, there's a lot that's of value. And I also think that each of us has that capacity. Like, it's not just that we have to look to another culture for it, there are things that we all love. You know, we love a tree, we love a plant, we love a child, we love our parent. And we're not going to just extract everything from that relationship like we might with a commodity we buy in the store. And so I feel like if we could expand the areas of things that we love, like maybe we could have that ethics of care in a market economy, in a without having to change the whole economic system.
We can. Yeah, absolutely. I think I think ultimately that's what you are discussing in this book. Like, that's the takeaway, right there. Isn't that what your hope is that's what people are going to get, and it's always step by step. You know, it's never like it's never like it just changes. You have to take those steps to do that. Yeah. Is that I put that in, I think I put that in your words, but what is your takeaway? Is that kind of that's what I got when I read the book. You know, there was a takeaway, something that I was going to really look at is what is the message here? It is that message. Like, how do we change this, right? And it's through loving those plants. But I should let you.
And people like, yeah.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. What is it, Andy, that you think that people can do? Like, what is it? You asked me that question. I think I'll ask you that. What do you think it is that they can do to help make that shift and that change? So we're not using them just as a commodity, but as living beings.
Probably what, the first, grow some of your own, put a pot in, develop a relationship with the plants.
Okay.
Even if you then buy products, then you have a relationship and you understand and you deepen that. I also think, on a basic what to do, buy certified or ingredients. They're not perfect, and none of the certifiers claim they're perfect, but it's a path on a journey of trying to address responsible sourcing. So certified organic, certified fair for life, fair wild, now there's regenerative, organic, certified. If a company's not certified, then talk to them, because often there are cost reasons for not being able to be. Then develop a relationship with them so that you can trust. I mean, another key thing is develop relationships. I mean, just what you were saying, pick up the phone. In the sourcing, that's what everybody says makes the key difference. You have to have relationships. And so as much as possible, pick up the phone and develop a relationship with a marketing person or the phone answerer person. And I think those.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think that's so good. Yeah, I want to share just a really quick story, and then I think we'll turn it over to Jenna. But I remember, like, in 1972 when I opened up my little herb store in Guerneville. And at that point, really, the word organic was hardly a common word at all. And sustainable and ecological or wildcrafted or cultivated. I mean, we were just happy to have herbs, right? Just herbs. And they could look like straw and dust because we didn't know any better. And I remember it was actually because of Herb Farm, believe it or not, Ed and Sarah Katz, who started Herb Farm, they came to some of our earliest conferences. So this was like in the mid 1970s. And Ed and Sarah had made this little handmade display case, and they were showing us what the plants were looking like that they were growing and what the plants were that we were in our store. It was just such an incredible difference, not only visually, but energetically. I mean, you could feel the difference energetically, the life force in those plants. So I started teaching that to my small classes, one person by person, like, we need to get quality. And then as this message got out and people would come into my store and they'd say, well, that doesn't really look like a good quality herb, right? And so that's what made the difference for me was, people, so the same thing that we're saying, that it's okay to call your companies up. You should be. And it's okay to say, this doesn't really look like good quality, and why. Sometimes there's reasons why. Bad year, the harvest wasn't good or whatever. But it was because I wanted my herbs to be really good, because my students were beginning to know what good meant. And it was all through education and sharing, and that also was a way for me to step up too. So that's what we're all doing. We're all just helping each other step up, and we're all doing it because of our love and our dependency for the plants, really that it's our love for each other as well, for humans. And I want to just share that one thing, that when you were talking about ways that we can make a difference, one is to love what's in your teacup and to, take that moment and love it. Because that's really all that relationship, that's the bottom line to me, is that love feeling that you have. So you start by loving the herbs that are in your jar and in your teacup, and you follow that through. And in that loving relationship, you want to do better for them. They're doing their best they can for us. And I think so, it becomes like almost a daily practice, and it's fun to do, you're making your herb tea, and then you're going to do a little exchange with that tea before you just drink it down. You do that with your medicine. And it's another way that we begin to, in a very simple way, to make a difference in that chain of events of how that product arrives to us, you know. Yeah, so.
That's beautiful.
Jenna, did you have a few questions that people had asked?
Yeah, we have almost 30 questions, so we'll see how many we can get through. I'm just gonna start at the top. So Sky wants to know, do herbs need to grow in their natural native environment in order to be most potent?
Do you want to answer that, Anne?
You can.
Okay. So, you know, we used to talk a lot about those, you know, using the plants that are growing out your back door. And, but when you, right now, and that's beautiful, you know the plants that are growing in your backyard, but right now our backyard is really, is globally, you know, we are able to reach out and travel and be in all parts of the world. And that doesn't really answer your question, but in a way it does. One of the things that we find is that when people are growing plants and they're growing them in really healthy, good soil, and they're growing them with a lot of love and care and attention, the vitality of those plants are just like the plants that are growing maybe in their own native habitat. And for lots of reasons, I think we need to choose those plants that are being grown with that kind of intention versus going into the woodlands and harvesting those plants. Because a lot of times those plants in their natural places are under a lot of duress and stress. So yeah, does that answer your question? Is that answering that question well? I think that plants that are growing with a lot of love and intention and good soil and with vibrancy will have the same, maybe a different energetic, but definitely a really high quality as those growing in their native habitats. Yeah. And do you want to answer?
One part to that in the chapter talking about cultivating, I talk about the early people like Ed Smith and Trout Lake Farm who were taking wild plants and cultivating them, and how they really had to learn how to grow them and to get the constituents in the right way. And it's more detailed than we can, you know, go into now, but it's a lot of people looking at those, because when plants move around, they do change the constituents if they've been used in traditional systems, say Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine.
Yeah, I know that's true, Anne, but also I think that there's a lot of reasons why we need to look at moving those plants, not necessarily from the wild into the fields, but why we need to start cultivating the plants versus always going into wild habitats. What I always would say to my students, there's a spirit in wild things that is very different than what you're going to get in your garden. You know, things just like you, when you go out into the wild and you spend a lot of time in wild, there's a difference in your spirit, so that energetic is different. On the other hand, we really need to be practicing good cultivation and growing these plants, because there's too many of us loving the plants to go into their native habitats and extracting them. So we have to find ways to really love these plants into their vibrancy in our cultivation methods. So yeah, I think we just have to use flower essences from the wild things.
And Sky did say that you answered her question, so that's
great.
great.
Thank you. Kind of in a roundabout way. Do a lot of fields.
However you get there is great. Leanne said, tell us about the New England Women's Conference in August and how to register for it.
Yeah, I hear it's going to happen this year, which is really exciting. And I think it's going to have to be virtual, because I don't think we're going to be able to be in person yet. And I don't know that they've put the information up yet about it, but yeah, you know, so just keep watching and the information will come up. But I'm almost positive that it's being planned to happen virtually this year. I'll be there.
Okay. Luann says, with all the herbs that are available, why not grow your own? Saving seeds, sharing herbs, isn't that what we should grow into?
Well, bless your heart. Yeah. If you have a little tiny space or a few pots, just like Ann was saying, you know, part of it is, yes, absolutely grow your own medicines and your own food and your own herbs, but not everybody can. So, and so that's one thing to realize. A lot of people are practicing herbalism and learning about plants, and they're living in cities. So they have maybe no space or very little space. But what Ann said, I thought was really beautiful. As much as possible, you know, even if you can just grow a pot of plants. I was looking over some of my homework, students' homework today, and this one woman has a garden planted in 7 barrels in her city backyard. So yeah, if we grow what you can, because it's such an incredible practice and such a way to get to know the plants, but not everybody can. So we have other people who will grow for us.
Mhm.
I don't grow all of my medicine. I let all my friends do that now.
And does your book talk about the Seed Sellers Company also?
No, and that's a really good point, because growing and getting enough medicinal seed for growing is a challenge, and it is not something that I dove into. Yeah.
Maybe your next book.
I'm recovering from this book.
And is there some place that you could direct people where they might read more about that or find out more about that? I mean, probably the Seed Savers, right? Seed Saver organizations. There's 2 or 3 of them in this country that are really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe like Seed Savers Exchange or somewhere like that. Julie would like to know, Anne, how has this journey for this book changed you and your relationship to plants?
Oh, that's a good one.
I trust them more, I think. A funny story, so an early draft of this book had a tree spirit in there leading me along. And I even sent 2 versions to Fern with the tree spirit. And Fern is a very generous editor, and she let the tree spirit stay in there. But I think and then until I realized that maybe the tree spirit did not belong in a book on the business of botanicals, that can be my next book. But I think what I learned from it was about listening to in that case, it was a tree, but that other quality, Rosemary, that you're talking about, the part that's not me, for me, it shows up as plants. And so I think trusting that more, which is another way of trusting my intuition, I think. It's also, you know, a lot of this summer really I now have a place where I have a bigger garden to really work on the soil, you know, things that really issues I've learned more about that I find really disturbing around the health of the soil and how we have 50 or 60 harvests left. So it's doing my part to kind of increase the soil quality and health.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I
Um,
think that sometimes right now in this world, you know, people feel sometimes a little hopeless and helpless, and we shouldn't, you know, because if each person is just doing their one small part, we become a mass making change, you know. So and yeah, there's so many people out there really positively, you know, helping the earth to change right now. There's so many who aren't, but there also is a massive number that are. We're a big force.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Amanda would like to know, after writing this book, will you prioritize local choices, grow your own, or continue to purchase plants from the global market?
I don't know that it's really changed how I'm from Vermont. I've always prioritized what I can grow or what I can buy from people who I know. But I also have an enormous amount of respect for companies that invest in their sourcing. And it's a way to support small, turmeric growers in southern India, done right, suddenly to start buying it right here, then that takes away a market and a way of livelihood. So it doesn't really change, but I already paid a lot of attention to how I sourced. I think maybe more, I didn't pay quite as much to fair for life kinds of things, And now that's much more on my radar, and really how to address the huge economic inequities, because one of the biggest, yes, it's overharvesting of wild plants, but it's also urban migration is a huge issue that threatens the whole global supply chain, that there's not people to harvest the plants or to do the growing, because it's really hard work. And it's even farmers in the US who grow herbs, they say they work all day really hard and then they have to barter over the price. Who wants to do that? And so there has to be ways to better provide a better livelihood. And it's not just money, it's contracts, long-term contracts, it's respect, it's caring for the whole community and the ecosystem the way we want to be cared for. So building that into sourcing is like right on my radar too.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Jamie has a few points in their question. Besides highlighting the responsible growers and companies, does the book educate and detail the problems with the industry? Does it offer ways to solve the problems you discovered? And does it offer suggestions for consumers to navigate the industry and make responsible and healthy choices?
I don't know, Rosemary, does it?
Should we just say buy the book? But maybe you could answer.
Anything that's not in the book is on the Sustainable Herbs Program website. How about that?
How do they find that website, Ann? It is all in the book. There is, like, what her questions are, a lot of them are answered in the book, but how do they get to that website?
sustainableherbsprogram.org.
Okay, great.
I can put that in the chat too.
And also, if you know the American Botanical Council, actually, could you put that in the chat too?
Mm-hmm.
And are there, if I recall correctly, there's a lot of the videos of the people that you visited too, right? That are available. So those are really wonderful to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Those are all on the website. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That makes it really nice. So a lot of the people that you're actually, almost all of them that you're writing about, you can see interviews and where they're gathering and stuff. It was awesome to see those. Yeah.
Well, we're right up at 8 and there's still 30 questions, so it doesn't feel right to go picking and choosing right now. Do you guys want to answer a couple more, or should we?
How about 2 more? Does that sound good, Ann?
Sure.
Okay. Sure. Let's see. Peter wants to know, Ann, what do you want to do next on your creative journey? I like that question.
That's a good one.
Write poetry with no research and garden.
That's a good answer. I can answer this one. It's can people who did not sign up watch the archive of this? Yes, this whole talk will be recorded and it will be sent out to everyone who registered. It's also streamed live on Facebook, and once we finalize it, it will be up on the Chelsea Green YouTube channel as well. Okay.
Jenna, one thing I wanted to mention too, just about Ann's work is she also wrote another really fabulous book called Thin Places that I love. And again, because she's such an amazing writer, and it also it's dealing with plants, but again, it's about community and, just soulfulness. So I really would like to recommend, put a plug in for that book too. It's one of my favorite books, actually, Thin Places.
Thank you.
Yvette mentioned in the chat that she put one in to the Q&A a while ago. So I'm going to scoop back up to her as the last one. And she says, hello, Ann and Rosemary. So happy to be here with you. Have you used herbal remedies for sundowner syndrome and in helping with healing the inner child?
With what kind of syndrome?
Sundowners.
Sundowners? I don't know what sundowners is. Maybe
she will explain. If not, I will. If she explains in the chat, I can send it to you in more detail.
And do you know, I've never heard of it, so obviously I haven't.
Sundowning, I think it's about Alzheimer's.
Oh, about Alzheimer's. Well, there was a lot of, I'll answer then, Ann, you can as well. I mean, there was a lot of research done years ago on using ginkgo, which actually was just the ginkgo sides. The studies weren't done on whole plant ginkgo. They were on the ginkgo sides in them. An early onset Alzheimer's with semi-good results. I mean, it didn't stop it, but it did slow the progress. So I usually recommend using that and Bacopa and Gotu-Kola on anybody that's starting to have memory loss or dementia. Right now, I don't think there's anything that I've read about that has, there's no cure known for Alzheimer's. If anything, there's ways of slowing it down and making people more comfortable. That's really about what I would have to say about it. Anne, do you have anything to add?
No.
Yeah, a few people have chatted that it's when people get confused when the sun goes down at nighttime or
Okay.
like, disoriented. I had never heard of it before.
I know for myself, I've been using for just, getting what I call brain fog, especially if, you go through long periods of darkness in your world, or, both physical darkness and emotional darkness. I love rosemary. There's an old combination actually that I've been making for years called rosemary it's a mixture of rosemary, Gotu-Kola, ginkgo, and sometimes I put a little peppermint in it, just kind of an activator. And that I can swear by it, and thousands of my students can too, where it's not necessarily for Alzheimer's, the disease, but when you start to get brain fog, you just get a little unfocused and have a hard time remembering things, then taking that remedy, it can be used as a tea, but it's usually tinctured and taken on a fairly regular basis. I usually say 3 to 4 weeks, pretty consistently. It definitely makes a difference for lots and lots of people, a majority of people who use it. So there's a group of herbs, that have a long history of being used for just feeding the brain and nourishing the brain.
Thank you both so much. It's been a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for everyone listening. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.